This is Damon Fordham, adjunct professor of history at the Citadel and Charleston Southern University. And this evening I'm going to talk to you about one of the worst places where you can possibly live, and that is the ghettos of the mind. It's one thing to live in a physical ghetto, but when you live physically in such a place, you could eventually save your money and perhaps rise in society and move out and do better things. Or you could still remain in an area like that, but yet expand your mind to where you can be a credit and a help to people who live there. But the ghetto of the mind is another thing altogether. The ghetto in the mind is the place where you believe that you can do no better for yourself. You are surrounded by negative speech and negative activity, and being limited to that turns you into a negative person sometimes, and so thus the cycle continues. But there are ways, of course, to get out of that. Now, I'm having in mind one young man that I knew 20 years ago when I started teaching. I also taught at a youth center in the middle of one of the most depressed areas of Charleston, South Carolina. And this young man, who was about 11 or 12, his was a particularly sad case. A lot of the young people who I taught did very well and are still doing well today. But this young man, I remember he was shocked in conversation with me when we were talking about the police, and he told me about how he would always run when he saw a policeman. And I said, well, that tells the policeman that you're guilty right there. You see, I never run from the police. And he's like, you don't run from the police? And I said, no, I know a lot of policemen, so I don't do that. And he said, wait a minute, Mr. Fordham, you don't sell dope? And I said, I never sold dope in my life. And he goes, you lie. So how many times you been to jail? And I said, I have never been to jail other than to teach classes there. You lie, he said. And he could not believe that I would be a full-grown adult without having done those types of activities, because this is what he knew. This is what he was surrounded by. And sadly, he went to jail himself. He was caught in this video selling drugs and flashing the money and so forth, and guns. And so he was in his jail in his late 20s, I believe, or early 30s, where after he was released, he made a bad drug deal in a car and was shot to death. Tragic, right? And this is not a racial thing. There was a young white girl I could remember when I mentioned earlier that I taught in jail for about 3 years. I taught GED classes to inmates at this particular jail, and this one young white girl from my hometown of Spartanburg, South Carolina, kept getting rearrested for prostitution. And I couldn't figure out why. Well, I met a minister who knew this young lady, and he explained to me that this particular young girl had been molested repeatedly throughout her childhood and in her adolescence. So when she became an adult, this is what she knew, so she would go out into the streets to make money through prostitution and would thus be arrested repeatedly for that. Yes, this is what happens when you deal with the ghettos of the mind. But it's important to understand that there are ways that you can get out of that situation. For one thing, it's important that you expose yourself to ideas other than what you see and what you were told. Because you see, most people only know what they see and what they're told. But if you expose yourself to things such as educational television or a good library that's filled with these documentaries and books with these interesting ideas that tell you of life beyond such places and ideas beyond the bitterness and negativity that you're surrounded by, you can go places. And better yet, no matter what school you attend, no matter how wretched the school may be, if the school is in a miserable area where the kids are running wild and the teachers have little control and all that, there's always at least one teacher in that school that you can go to get some good ideas on how to lead a better life. Make use of them. Go to them. And so let things like that and the exposure to ideas outside of what is around you become a part of you. And that way you can change your life. It's happened to many people before, and it could also happen to you, to escape the ghettos of the mind. This is Damon Fordham.